Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's Thursday, February 27th, 2025, about 3:06 p.m. We have a quorum, and this is the Senate Elections Committee, and I call it to order. We have 4 items on the agenda today. We have a presentation from the Secretary of State, and we also have a couple of bills. While the Secretary of State comes up, he is going to be first on our agenda today. And Secretary of State Simon will tell us about the potential impact of federal budget cuts on Minnesota's democracy, and we'll follow it with the 3 bills. And while the Secretary is getting settled there, I just want to have a few words here. We're going to have a brief discussion, and then we'll move on to the first bill. Hopefully we can get through that bill by somewhere around 3:30, 3:40. Secretary Simon can testify on it, and then we'll have and his staff, because they have to leave early. But know that this is the first discussion of this topic, and we'll revisit it in a couple of weeks. Nobody has all the information to make all the decisions needed. There are things that have been paused, and some things have been put back into place. I'm glad that, Mr. Secretary, that you're able to join us today and brief us on the support that the federal government has been providing to states and how that may be changing. The federal government historically has been a strong partner in ensuring that we have free, fair, and secure elections. I fear that the current administration might be backing away from this commitment and putting our democracy at risk. So, Mr. Secretary, please introduce yourself for the record.
Great.
And continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. Thanks for giving me some time today to discuss a little bit of background on federal support for election security. It's a little bit up in the air right now, and I'll try to treat it in a fair way, take your questions, and just give you a little bit of my impression from where I sit right now. So the reason we're even here stems from 2016. So during the 2016 election, this is what happened in the words of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, quote, "Russian government-affiliated cyber actors conducted an unprecedented level of activity against state election infrastructure in the run-up to the 2016 U.S. election," end quote. That's their language. That's a fancy way of saying that the Russian government or its proxies tried to get into our stuff. They tried to get into our databases, Minnesota and 20 other states, 21 total at first, and then other states after that. So that really changed everything. I've said many times that you can divide the world of elections administration into 2 halves, before 2016 and after 2016, because everyone, regardless of state, political viewpoint, or anything, that really changed everything in terms of what our defenses had to look like. So following that 2016 election, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, designated U.S. election systems as part of the nation's critical infrastructure. Now, those 2 words have meaning. Critical infrastructure is a particular designation. It arises out of the Patriot Act, I believe, signed into law after 9/11 and the aftermath of September 11th, 2001. And it means sort of what it sounds like. If a particular sector is designated as critical infrastructure, it's entitled to heightened attention, protection, resources, and the like. So the official language says that this designation is established and given to, quote, "systems and assets, whether physical or virtual, so vital to the United States that the incapacity or destruction of such systems and assets would have a debilitating impact on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination of those matters," end quote. So other sectors that enjoy this critical infrastructure designation include the things you would hope it would, just as Americans: the water supply, the power grid, the banking system, military bases, hospitals, critical manufacturing. You can go to the websites and figure out all of them. But there are a number of these critical infrastructure sectors, and again, as of early 2017, elections was added to that list. So elections now enjoys that critical infrastructure designation. So each one of these sectors or subsectors that enjoy this designation of critical infrastructure is given a federal sector-specific agency that is designated and charged with structuring and managing the work of that sector. And at this time, and at that time, rather, the election infrastructure was designated as a critical infrastructure subsector. The Department of Homeland Security was its designated sector-specific agency. So the folks in charge of making sure that it's critical infrastructure and making sure that it's protected as such is DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. So in October of 2017, just bringing you up to speed on kind of the timeline here, in October of 2017, a Government Coordinating Council, GCC, sorry for the acronyms, it's the federal government's, not ours, but GCC was formed to ensure federal information and resources reach state and local election officials. And in February of 2018, the Elections Infrastructure GCC, or Government Coordinating Council, voted to form what's called an Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I know that's a mouthful. It's EIISAC, to support the cybersecurity needs of the election subsector. So the EIISAC has been funded by the federal government as a division of a nonprofit called the Center for Internet Security. So it's a joint venture between this nonprofit called CIS, Center for Internet Security, funded by, indirectly, the Department of Homeland Security. Finally, later in 2018, Congress passed and the President signed legislation establishing what's now known as CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, CISA. And at this time, the support for elections critical infrastructure was moved to CISA, which is a subdivision of DHS. So you've got Homeland Security, you've got this new thing as of 2018 called CISA, and the funding for this EIISAC that I mentioned was provided by CISA as well. So CISA provides, to this day, a suite of services that are available at no cost to state and local government officials and private sector election infrastructure partners. And I just want to emphasize that these services do not just support the state, but support local election offices as well, counties, cities, and the like. And all the services are available upon request and are strictly voluntary. We don't have to do them. It's not command and control. The federal government isn't bossing us around, telling us we have to do it, but they put out a menu of services, and we can order off the menu. The ones we like, we order. The ones we don't, we don't. Same for local government. So it's not the federal government telling us we got to do stuff. It's us choosing off of a menu of services that they provide. So some of the cybersecurity services that are provided right now free of cost by the Department of Homeland Security through CISA include things like cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning of an organization's internet or public-facing systems, access to the .gov domain. The .gov domain is available solely to U.S.-based government organizations. They also provide in-person and virtual trainings on such items as phishing or responding to ransomware. We also get a suite of physical security services as distinct from cybersecurity, just plain old physical security. So the most critical of these are in-person assessments by CISA protective security advisors. So these assessments are most frequently of county and city elections offices as well as polling places. So they'll come in and they'll advise us and advise our partners at the local level about physical security. They also do physical security trainings, including de-escalation trainings. Another thing that they provide for us is incident response resources. So in the event of a cyber incident, CISA provides rapid responses and resources at the request of an impacted entity. They also provide best practice and security guidelines. So for example, CISA will assist in conducting tabletop exercises at the national level, as well as coordinating tabletop exercises at the state and local level at their request. So I'll give you an example. Last year, 2024, we all know a big presidential election year. We knew it would attract a lot of attention and interest and scrutiny, and that's okay. So early in the year, very early, January or February, we held with CISA, with the Department of Homeland Security, a big tabletop exercise and briefing at Camp Ripley. And it was a great partnership. They came out. We had folks from the FBI, CISA, Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the majority of Minnesota counties were represented in other local governments as well. And we gamed out some of these security scenarios, including physical security, cybersecurity, and the like. So the other thing I would mention is that CISA maintains and develops a vast library of resources to support state and local election officials on topics from the very technical cyber best practices to physical security issues like how to respond to hazardous materials sent to election officials in the mail. Another thing that they provide to us that we in our office have found particularly helpful is they have enabled me and a small number of senior members of our staff and other offices throughout the country, Secretary of State offices, they have given us a secret level security clearance. Obviously, we had to pass it, we had to apply for it, and we got it. So a few of us in our office have it, and it entitles us to periodic classified briefings by the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and others. Particularly in election years, they'll have us in there, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 5 times, I'd guess, in a given year, where we get these secret level intelligence briefing about the threat assessment out there, particularly from foreign adversaries. So through funding from CISA, the EISAC, which I mentioned, provides a whole different set of security services. So for example, they will give us, at no cost, they will give us layered defense for election security with device level protection, including what's called endpoint detection and response, EDR, which helps block malicious activity and stop an attack at the endpoint level. We also get active defense against malicious domains by malicious domain blocking and reporting, or MDBR, which prevents IT systems from connecting to harmful web domains and helps limit infections related to known malware, ransomware, phishing, and other cyber threats. We also get from them, through this EISAC, 24/7, 365 Security Operations Center offering threat intelligence, detection, and response assistance. We get election-specific threat reports, and we get discounted and no-cost cybersecurity tools and resources. We get access to an annual self-assessment survey to evaluate cybersecurity maturity. So while these services are critical and have been very useful to us, there is also an added benefit that these services are being provided from the federal government as opposed to a private vendor. I'll just give you an example, and many of you are familiar with this in your daily lives and in your life experience. There's no question, take something like penetration testing. We could get that from a private vendor. There's no question we could. We'd have to pay for it, it would be expensive, but even if money were no object, we could get that. But here's the critical difference. The private vendor, as good and as skilled and as thoughtful as that private vendor may be, they are not going to be able to connect the dots in the way that someone from CISA is. Why? Because the folks from CISA are briefed on all the secret level or even higher intelligence. So they can connect the dots between any potential weakness we might have and what the actual threat landscape is out there. What foreign adversaries are snooping around or trying to do, for example. That's nothing that any, even the best, private vendor could do. So that's really the value added there. It's not just the physical service, it's how they're able to connect the dots. It's the know-how, it's the expertise from these folks who have been working in the intelligence community for a long time. So we know that nation-state actors have targeted our nation's election systems, and having the force and resources of our own federal government to help defend against these threats, we think is critical. So CISA also has access to real-time threat information from other federal agencies like the ODNI, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and they really help coordinate a whole-of-government response when it's needed. So the alternative to these services, if they were to disappear or be degraded, would be asking 50 states to create 50 solutions to these threats. And we don't think that's efficient. These federal level services allow us to really, as I say, connect the dots that otherwise would not happen. So again, we think these were critical, particularly in the last election. We saw their value pretty consistently. And in addition to all these preventative and preparedness resources from CISA, CISA's critical real-time response to incidents this year was essential. So let me give you some examples. You may have remembered from the news last election cycle, there were threatening mailings to many states, including us, in late September. You might remember this news story. We had to evacuate our office, as did other states. We were by no means the only one, but a number of states, including Minnesota, received a mailing with white powder in it. So we had to shut everything down, evacuate everyone, have the FBI come in, state law enforcement. They did the chemical testing. We weren't allowed to come back until that was done. Thankfully, blessedly, it tested negative. It was not a hazardous substance. But we didn't know that, and none of the other states could have known that at the time. So that's one example. We also know that there were swatting efforts targeting election officials, including secretaries of state. Not in Minnesota, I should add, not me, not our staff, but in other states, there were examples, multiple examples of secretaries of state and elections administrators being targeted with swatting. There were bomb threats by both foreign and unknown actors targeting polling places and election offices. There were distributed denial of service attacks directed at election systems. There were fake videos, not in Minnesota, but fake videos created and promoted by foreign entities attempting to undermine confidence in election system in states like Georgia, in Pennsylvania, and the like. So again, while Minnesota thankfully did not encounter swatting or foreign-created fake videos related to elections, Minnesota counties did receive bomb threats, and the Minnesota Secretary of State office was one of the places targeted with the threatening mailing, as I mentioned, causing an evacuation of our Veterans Services Building office. So what is the future of these services? That's why we're here. That's why, Mr. Chair, you called me here. We really don't know. And the fact that we don't know is cause for concern. So here's what we do know. CISA has placed on leave agency personnel who were hired specifically to work with the election sector. These are people who worked on election security, including cybersecurity. CISA has now ended its contract with the Center for Internet Security. That's that nonprofit I mentioned that partners with the EIISAC, ending that election-specific nationwide program to support elections administrators and vendors. And CISA is now conducting what it calls an internal evaluation of all election-related services with findings and recommendations to be delivered in a report on or very near March 6th. Now, we're going to know a lot more after March 6th, for sure, but the initial steps taken by CISA are troubling, I think. I think that a rollback of these services could compromise the security of our elections. CISA has been a strong and effective partner. I want to point that out. I want to put an exclamation point on that. We are now, I guess, 4 presidential administrations in, if you count the Trump administration twice. This was the tail end of the Obama administration. We had an excellent relationship. In the first Trump administration, an excellent relationship, excellent, including the political appointees, not just career people. I can't say enough about how helpful and good and supportive they were. Ditto for the Biden administration, and now we're in the second Trump administration. So this has been an unbroken chain of support, really good people doing good things and smart things on behalf of our elections. So we don't know what comes next. I think in your packets or posted or both, the National Association of Secretaries of State, of which I'm a member, has penned a bipartisan letter to Secretary Noem of the Department of Homeland Security, asking her to protect these services to the election's critical infrastructure sector. And I have to tell you, having just come from our conference, there is broad bipartisan support. We don't do anything unless there is broad bipartisan support. So I signed this letter, as did colleagues from all over the country, various political parties. And I just want to be clear, members, my read of the situation among the secretaries and my own personal view is it's every administration's right, absolutely, every new administration's right to make tough decisions about org chart, HR, personnel, absolutely. And this is not an attempt to second guess those things, because it is their right to do that. They can merge, they can unmerge, they can combine, they can start new sub-agencies, they can do those things, and that's fine, that's within their purview. Our letter as Secretaries of State is focused on the services. We don't care as much whose seal is at the top of the letter or who in particular is providing these services. That's absolutely an administrative question for any executive branch and any president of the United States, new or old. Our concern, our eye is on the ball here, and the ball is the services that I've described and that the letter details. Those are the things that our members on a broad bipartisan basis have found really useful, and although we won't know until after March 6th at the end of this review, our concern is that one or more of those could go away. We don't know that yet. There's no way I could know that. But you asked me here, Mr. Chair, I believe, to just discuss that prospect and that possibility. So these are the services that we think works. And as I said, there's a bipartisan consensus that we want to save those things. So look, we have a really excellent election system from the standpoint of cybersecurity, physical security, and the like in Minnesota. We have excellent partners at the state level as well. But when dealing with nation-state actors, no one state can be a match for them. They just can't. We need a coordinated federal response and federal resources to some of these threats. And we want to be true to the critical infrastructure designation. If it means anything, it means providing resources to people in those sectors, regardless of the sector, whether that's food and agriculture, transportation, the power grid, the banking system, all of them, including elections, and equally should be entitled to some extra resources to help make that designation mean something. Because if we're going to tell foreign adversaries or foreign actors of any kind that these are sectors that we care about in particular, and that we consider an attack on with the most seriousness, then I think there's got to be something backing it up. So we don't know what CISA is going to do yet. I want to be clear about that. But the services that we've outlined in the letter and that I've talked about today are the ones that we really think need protecting. So with that, Mr. Chair and members, I'm happy to answer questions myself, or you may really want to talk to two of my colleagues, Bill Ekblad, you've seen him before, our security navigator, who's very much in tune and in touch with CISA, and he serves on the board of the EIISAC, and Larry Olson, our Chief Information Security Officer. They are both available to help answer your questions, particularly on technical matters. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I just want to remind everyone that we are limited in time, and what we need to do is make sure that everyone, if they have a question, that you ask it in the briefest possible way. And we actually would like to move on to the next bill by about 3:35. So it's, we're getting awfully tight on that. And I do have, on the list here, I have Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be fairly brief. Thank you, Secretary Simon. I appreciate this presentation and the information you provided. I am going to ask about our election workers, the 30,000 people, our neighbors and friends and family who do this work, working at the polls to be sure things run smoothly, as well as the countless election workers at the city, at the county, across our state, deserve to feel safe when they are doing this work, and we rely on them. And as you described, this federal assistance has been key in helping states and local governments increase election security and combat disinformation and investigate threats and violence against election workers, which, as you described, are on the rise in Minnesota and across the state. So I'm worried about that safety piece, given the cuts in funding or the freeze in funding right now. If that were to, continue to not come forward, given that CISA helps states, investigate the threats and that type of thing, do you, or what would the impact be? Do those cuts impact Minnesota's ability to protect workers from intimidation and violence? What would that mean for our election workers in Minnesota?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Bolden, I would say there is a potentially serious impact. I want to be very clear. We don't know what CISA is going to do yet. There is a freeze right now in place until after that March 6th evaluation. And they're right to evaluate and figure out mission and org chart and all the rest, as I said. But I am concerned that if the decision is made to back away from some of those services, particularly physical security consulting, which Mr. Ekblad has, he literally last year, he and his team literally went to all 87 counties in Minnesota and talked with folks about cybersecurity and physical security. So I think it would be a mistake. It would put election workers potentially at unnecessary risk. But I don't know, Mr. Ekblad, if there's anything you want to say about that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Having gone to all 87 counties.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ekblad.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, I think as Secretary Simon said, we would indeed experience a degradation in the detail of support we can provide to those election workers. Now, there are other resources we can lean on. As Secretary Simon said, some of them would come at cost. There's some private consultants and so forth that can backfill some of that. But to have the straight connection to a true understanding of the threat, the federal government has a monopoly on that, and we would feel the brunt of that impact if that support were to degrade.
Senator Bolden. We have on the list Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary and staff. When it comes to CISA, in my role in the private sector job, I utilize CISA quite a bit. In my present capacity, I am overseeing the vulnerability detection infrastructure of an organization, and utilizing the known exploitable vulnerabilities database and other information is definitely critically important to that information. But when it comes to exploits from a digital perspective, the aspect I'm most concerned about when it comes to our elections, and I'm wondering if you can enumerate a little bit, is the voting infrastructure from the voting polls and the communication that takes place to upload that information to the Secretary's office, and then the systems that it might be contained. Are those protected? And what is the relationship between information from CISA and the voting infrastructure?
Senator, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Lucero. Thanks. And I appreciate the question, especially in light of your own personal professional expertise. I wonder if I might turn to Mr. Ekblad about that particular piece. I have some more bird's eye view comments, but on the technical piece, I don't know if Mr. Ekblad wants to say.
Mr. Ekblad.
Mr. Chair. Senator, indeed, I think we have confidence in the security measures that we have in place for the upload of data, for example, from the front end at the local level to the counties. And actually, Mr. Olson may have some additional details on that. In terms of CISA's role in that, my mind goes to the process that exists at the Election Assistance Commission that tests all of that election voting system hardware that you're referring to. And those tests, the rigor behind them is all public. You can see what they do and what they test for and what they find. And those tests, as I understand them at the federal level, are informed by the expertise of the entire federal government, to include CISA. So when they are testing the equipment, they are doing it with the full knowledge of, as you said, the known exploited vulnerabilities list and other CISA resources that can ensure that equipment is validated and verified to not be subject to those exploits. And so there is a linkage at that level. And I don't think with what we know now, there's reason to suspect that that will degrade, although we don't know for sure until this March 6th review is complete. But the CISA core cyber services support feeds into that validation and certification process for election equipment. So that to me is where the connection comes. And I would defer to Mr. Olson perhaps for some expertise on the protection of our systems.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Olson.
Senator Lucero, every year we do get a risk and vulnerability assessment, which is consists of two components: a 1 week offsite where they try and hack into accounts, do a phishing exercise, and test our external facing assets. And then 1 week they come on site and they try and break in with any information that they've gleaned from the first week. Or if they can't, then we allow them in, and because we always assume that someone's going to breach us. And so we keep letting them in farther and farther and farther until they can get in all the way to the elections database, so we can kind of see where our vulnerabilities are at and things we need to tighten up. We've improved every year. I know our last go around, they decided we were probably good enough to try and do a red team, blue team exercise, which is the next level up from just a risk and vulnerability assessment. So we do let them go all the way through, assuming that they can get in.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. And I guess I'd like to ask you, I neglected to say that in the beginning, please identify yourself for the record and
Sure,
who you're affiliated with.
I'm the CISO for the Secretary of State's.
Thank you, sir.
One follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. And for those who aren't, I don't want, at the risk of talking over people's heads, the red team, blue team. Red team is the team that attempts to penetrate. The blue team is the team that attempts to defend, hence the blue. And so, yes, we have red team, blue teams, penetration testers, and those trying to defend the infrastructures and assets. So the one follow-up I have is, when it comes to specifically then the assets that are out in the field or remotely at the voting locations, take any technology, take Microsoft operating systems. A point in time or any evaluation that occurs is stale the next day and sometimes even the next hour. And hence the reason why Microsoft has their Patch Tuesdays and the monthly updates, because there's constantly new vulnerabilities being discovered and new threat actors that are seeking to exploit those vulnerabilities. So I'm not relieved with any annual testing or even semi-annual testing because it's a continual cat and mouse game. So my question then, follow-up, would be for that equipment, for the entire infrastructure, but specifically out in the voting locations, how protected are those systems from exploitation? Are they air-gapped? So the first question would be, are they online? Do they have any network connectivity, either hardwired or wireless? And how protected are they, even if they don't have the wireless or wired, from somebody tampering with them physically to create some kind of an access that is not either networked or otherwise?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ekblad.
Senator, I think I would like to suggest, if it's acceptable, that maybe this level of detail not be handled in such a public forum, if we could provide some insight into how some of those specifics go, because I do worry a little bit about saying too much about what is and isn't in place as defenses for these critical systems. I can say with confidence, though, that we do have measures in place working closely with the counties. And the other key stakeholder that we haven't mentioned is the vendors of those equipment, who also maintain rigorous security requirements for how the customers, in this case the counties, operate that equipment. So without saying too much about where there may be concern, I think I hope that sheds some light.
Thank you, Mr. Ekblad. Those are good comments that we don't really want to tell people that something can or can't be done in this public forum. So we have two more people on the list, and I want to remind them to be extremely brief because we do want to get this bill done really very quickly. Next person on the list is Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I can understand and appreciate your comments about being brief, but you decided to have a briefing on the security, and it's important for us. So I think to try and stifle conversation, we got plenty of time to do the other three bills, is a little disingenuous. Secretary Simon, we appreciate it, you being here. I think it's important to cover these. You got the opportunity, to list some of the risks or some of the changes that are occurring. The federal CISA agency has what, 3,300 people. They laid off 130. I think we're all in an entire reevaluation, right? I think President Trump created this office under the Department of Homeland Security. So I think they understand it's extremely important. It is important to us as well. With the refocus and the financial situation of both federal and state, our state spending like mad and creating great challenges, it's going to cause both our federal government and our state government to reevaluate what the priorities are. I'm pretty confident that at the end of the day, they understand it's important, and we understand it's important to make sure that our elections are safe and secure. And so I just think that it's great we're doing this. I think we're trying to do a little fear-mongering, and I do appreciate you actually admit we don't know much, but we spent 25 minutes talking about the terror that could happen and how funding or cybersecurity is going to affect the security of somebody in an office. Those things aren't going to change. It's going to be our responsibility regardless of what goes on, and I believe we'll likely have, after the reevaluation is done, much like the hard conversations that are going to have to happen here in this state, which some might already know what that forecast looks like from a budgetary perspective. We're going to have to ensure that the critical things are continued to be funded and staffed adequately, and elections is one of them. So let's get to the business of doing our work. We can get over the fearmonger. We both can toss some threats back and forth or fearmonger back and forth. It's not helpful to us. Let's get down. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and figure out how the heck do we continue to do the critical things we need, not just elections, but we got a massive budget and spending problem both nationally and locally. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klein. I just wanted to say that the Secretary of State has offered to come back when he knows more, we know more, we maybe have more detailed questions, and he's going to be available. He is committed to be available to do follow-ups. So we have one more question here from Senator Westland. Thank you, Senator Westland.
Thank you. Pardon me? No, I was Bolden the other day. I know, we all look alike, as I say. Yeah, I don't think we're fear-mongering. I think we're trying to get a handle on what's happening here, because if there are cuts to this work, that will be very detrimental and catastrophic potentially. So, but I understand the desire to try to downplay what the federal government is doing. So the Trump administration's potential upcoming decision to refuse to recognize elections as critical infrastructure threatens to undermine key resources which Minnesota relies on to keep our state's elections the strongest in the country. Cuts and freezes have forced CISA to stop ongoing election security work now, as I understand it, and is a deeply irresponsible move, which is straight out of the Project 2025 playbook. I guess the question that I have for you, Mr. Secretary, or your testifiers, is that during your presentation that you made to us at the start of the session, staff focused on the important role that CISA does play in helping Minnesota identify and combat election disinformation. And I guess my question to you is, have the staff cuts, the freezes, any of the actions that CISA that has been taken at this point, has that interrupted work presently?
Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Westland. So your question is, has it interrupted anything presently? Well, the CISA has terminated its contract with CIS, which runs this EIISAC. Sorry for all the acronyms. But so they have done that, and so I know those folks are wrestling with what comes next. So that contract has been terminated, but we simply don't know what's coming next. And it's not an attempt, certainly on my part, to fearmonger. I'm just telling you what the options are. What we know is there have been some people who have been placed on administrative leave. We know they've terminated that contract. We know that they're doing a review. I'm just here to tell you, as a bipartisan group of senators, secretaries of state rather did, which is that, hey, here are a handful of services that we really like. Wherever the org chart lands or the HR issues land, we're not here to micromanage this administration or any other on who and how many and what seal and what organization. That's absolutely their purview. We are focused on the services. So to answer your question, what we do know now is that they have terminated their contract with CIS. So that group, that EIISAC, is probably in jeopardy. They may be folded in elsewhere. We don't know that yet. I think that's the best outcome. But there are services that group provides that may end up being in limbo. We don't know that yet either. But that is, I guess, the danger. So that's what we know so far. I think we're just going to know a whole lot more after March 6th.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Secretary Simon.
Yeah.
Senator Westland, follow-up?
Just briefly, you know, I appreciate you being here, and again, I think right now we don't know what we don't know, but I do want to say that CISA is a critically important part of maintaining election security, not only in Minnesota, but across the country. And so I hope that all of the members of this committee would be concerned about any attempt to undermine cybersecurity related to our elections, and we'll have to see what happens in the future.
With that, Secretary Simon is asked to be excused. He's asked to leave early, so we have a bill that he is going to testify on. So we're going to move on to the first bill. And that is a bill that I'm the sponsor of, so I'm going to turn the gavel over to the Vice Chair Westland, or whatever name she would like to be known as.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll have you make your way to the table. So we are going to hear Senate File 1430, which deals with the appropriation to the voter fund. I will stretch out my comments so that the good senator can gather himself and And Senator Carlson, as you make your way to the table, and as soon as you are situated and ready to proceed, please feel free to begin your presentation for your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first bill today is the Senate File 1430. Senate File 1430 is it's the changing voter operations technology and election resources, adding to the account that is available for counties to distribute to their precincts. It builds upon one of the accomplishments of the last biennium in literal investment in Minnesota's democracy in the form of the voter account. This new fund, new in 2023, to which we appropriated between $3 and $4 million, provides funds to local governments to help defray a small part of the costs involved in administrating state elections. The formula ensures that all counties get some basic level of funding and that those with higher populations get more based on their population. Counties work with their cities to determine whether some of the funds flows to cities or whether the county retains the full amount to compensate for election administration that cities benefit from. While this funding is important, it is not sufficient. The state should do more to help defray these expenses, which is the point of this bill. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Simon to give some testimony.
Thank you, Senator Carlson. Secretary Simon, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. I just want to start out with a thank you to all committee members, because in 2023, when the legislature created this fund, the voter fund, it was a big deal. It was the first time since statehood that we can figure out that you have a dedicated pot of money, a dedicated fund to allow some consistent investment and help for the local administration of elections. And I just want to point out that this was never intended as a buyout. There's not a single county, city, or township administrator I've ever talked to that is looking for the state to take over the cost of running election. They're not asking for that. I'm sure they wouldn't get it even if they asked. This is a supplement. This is just to augment at the margins the work that they do. There's been more attention drawn to our election administrators in recent years, but the business of elections, as you all know, has gotten a lot more complex and a lot more expensive. So you probably also know or remember that our office is responsible for distributing the dollars in this fund to all 87 counties according to a formula in statute. And that's a formula that was worked on by folks in counties across the state. It was agreed upon by the counties. It's rigorously nonpartisan. So it's their formula that everyone agreed on. And we do that each year before July 20th. So the initial investment of $1.25 million was distributed last July, July of 2024. And then after last July, our office distributed over $4.8 million as the legislature chose to shift two other grant funds into that voter account. So we're responsible for collecting data from cities and counties annually on the spending of these funds. So we track it pretty rigorously and in detail. And in our report released earlier this year, which we're happy to get to you, and you should be able to get it pretty easily, from the first distribution of $1.25 million, we saw that local election offices use the dollars for a variety of expenses. The top three expenses were hardware and software, equipment, and staffing costs for both election administrators and election judges. So again, to those of you who had a hand in this directly or indirectly, thank you for supporting our local elections and local election administration. And we just hope that you'll be able to continue support and grow the investment in the voter account to assist our local governments in running these elections. They do such a good job, and I always mention anytime I'm here or in any committee, I never miss an opportunity to mention, some of you know this from your own personal experience, but out of our 87 counties, only 9 counties have full-time elections-only folks, where all they do is elections and elections only. In all the rest of our counties, the vast, vast majority, the folks who do elections and do them so well and so professionally and so ethically, they're juggling a lot of things. They're wearing a few hats. They might do public inspections. They might do property taxes. They might do ditch and drainage work. Depends on the county. So they're the ones in particular, I would say, that really could use a few extra bucks on the side. And it usually, if you break it down, it's a few $1,000s per county in some particular counties, but that really helps them a lot to get that extra poll pad or to hire that extra person on a full-time or part-time basis for a particular high-volume election. So I know it's appreciated by them. It's certainly appreciated by us. Again, we just distribute it. We don't get any of the money. We're just the pass-through. That's the way you structured it, and we dole it out based on the formula that you have blessed. But it's really, really worked well, and I hope you'll continue to support it. So thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Next on our list of testifiers, we have Olmsted County Commissioner Michelle Rossman via Zoom. Please state your name for the record and go ahead and provide your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Rossman, and I'm a county commissioner from Olmsted County. And I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Association of Minnesota Counties, an organization representing all of Minnesota's 87 counties. I appreciate Senator Carlson hearing Senate File 1430 and this opportunity to speak to you today in support of this bill. Election support and funding is something that's quite popular at AMC. It's truly one of those unifying issues that brings together all counties, no matter their size, geography, or political leanings. Counties and local governments take their election duties extremely seriously. We know that we are responsible for administering the most important function of a thriving democracy, and that public trust and confidence in this process is vital. We dutifully administer local, state, and federal elections, and it's also no secret that the state has asked us to do a lot when it comes to elections, particularly in recent years. In Olmsted County, we received approximately $23,500 in 2023 and $97,000 in 2024 for a total of around $120,000 over the last 2 years. We plan to use these funds for election technology infrastructure, specifically upgrading our e-poll books. Upgrading election equipment is essential as it strengthens our overall technological infrastructure, ensuring secure and reliable elections. These funds will allow us to purchase additional devices to meet the demands of an ever-increasing number of registered voters. We're also planning to purchase new omni-ballot systems that will replace the old AutoMark units at each polling location, of which we have 32 in Olmsted County. And this will eventually cost our taxpayers $130,000. The voter funds help us plan and to be good stewards of limited taxpayer resources. We are very appreciative of the state's commitment to assisting local government cover the mandate of running elections. We thank you for this time today and respectfully ask your support of this bill.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Up next is Kathy Sorensen, Blaine City Clerk, who is also via Zoom. Ms. Sorensen, if you can identify yourself for the record, and then please go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Westland, Senators. Kathy Sorensen, City Clerk for the City of Blaine. I'm happy to be here today to speak on behalf of the League of Minnesota Cities in support of Senator Carlson's bill to increase funding for the voting, operations technology, and election resources account. Blaine, like many cities in the state, run our own elections in partnership with our counties and the state of Minnesota. To ensure orderly, hassle-free, and secure elections, we strive to continuously improve our election processes, embrace new efforts to increase voter participation, and invest our precious local funds on the most pressing needs of elections needs. Because local funds are often in short supply, cities have been very grateful for the commitment from the state to grant local governments with these voter account funds. These grants have an impressive range of election uses, from equipment to security upgrades, to staff costs and matches to federal funds. Not all counties make direct payments for local needs. However, this last year, many counties from across the state assisted cities with their direct election needs by providing funding for staffing, hardware and software, printing costs, and more. In addition to direct assistance to cities, countless other communities benefited from the investments the counties made in their election operations, funding many of the same priorities. In Blaine, we benefited from being able to offset the cost of our joint powers agreement with Anoka County, and we use those funds for election equipment, annual software and hardware maintenance for electionware, and the countywide election management software, which is key to managing elections. This funding helped offset our annual JPA payment of $15,000 by almost half, which directly helps Blaine residents while continuing to ensure safe and secure elections across the state. In closing, we are grateful to Senator Carlson for bringing this bill forward. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the League of Minnesota Cities, to express the gratitude of cities across the state and to lend our support of Senate File 1430. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sorensen. Appreciate you appearing today. Next up is Nicole Conlon, Hennepin County Elections Administrator. Oh, and there she is. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Nicole Conlon, and I am the Election Systems Division Manager at Hennepin County. I administer the voter fund allocations to the county in our 46 municipalities. I am here today in support of Senate File 1430. Administering elections is not cheap, and as you can imagine, the city budgets vary greatly even within the Hennepin County borders. For example, the city of Bloomington's elections budget is vastly different than the elections budget for the city of Loretto. Hennepin County Elections wants all voters to have a secure and consistent voting experience. The money that you allocate to the voter fund gives some relief to local elections offices with already tight budgets, allowing for greater equity of services across jurisdictions. For fiscal year 2023, Hennepin County received just over $229,000. All of the Hennepin County Voter Fund distributions went towards covering annual voting equipment maintenance fees. Thank you for your time and support, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. And on Zoom, our final testifier is Michael Stahlberger, Blue Earth County Director of Property and Environmental Resources and Minnesota Association of County Officers. Please identify yourself for the record and then go ahead with your testimony.
All right, thank you, Chair Westland, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'm Michael Stahlberger. I'm Director of Property and Environmental Resources for Blue Earth County, and my department is responsible for administering elections for about 40,000 registered voters. I'm here today on behalf of the Minnesota Association of County Officials, MACO. MACO represents all 87 counties' auditors, treasurers, recorders, finance officers, and elections administrators at the county level. Our association worked closely with your committee and Secretary Simon to create the voter fund. I'm here first to express our sincere appreciation to the Legislature for their support of the county and municipal election costs through the past 2 years and the voter fund. I'm also here to express our association's very strong support for Senate File 1430. Conducting elections in Minnesota are expensive, and they are a responsibility that our association's membership takes very seriously. We work hard to enhance the efficiency, the administration, and the security of elections statewide. Typically, this expense has been borne by local property tax administrators, local property taxpayers, and the voter fund helps with that offset. The testimony that you've already heard today has addressed how some of the funds were specifically spent in cities and counties across the state, but I wanted to step back and provide a little bit of context on the voter fund from the county perspective. First, the voter fund is a major step forward towards a state and local partnership in sharing elections costs. It creates a dependable and ongoing funding stream. Second, the voter fund has been utilized to fill very critical gaps for elections administration. Of the $1.25 million allocated for fiscal year 2023, just over 3/4 of those dollars were spent by July of 2023. Just under $500,000 of those dollars went to hardware and software expenditures. Another $180,000 went towards election equipment purchases, and another $180,000 went towards elections-related staffing. Third, counties have been good stewards of these funds and will continue to do so. Of the remaining money that was not spent out of that first allocation, or roughly $282,000, those funds were carried over by 35 counties, and MACO surveyed those counties to understand their plans for future use. 7 of those 35 counties had already spent the money in the rest of calendar year 2023, paying for costs associated with the general and primary elections. The remaining counties, of 12 of them which responded, equaling about $167,000 of those remaining dollars, are planning on using them to purchase new rosters, tabulating equipment, assisted voting devices, equipment like that. One county reported that they're using this money to actually purchase a fireproof and locking safety cabinet, a super critical part of maintaining security with their ballots. Since the voter fund is stable and dedicated funding, it'll allow election administrators to continue to plan for these long-term investments in elections technology and to provide even better and more secure election services statewide. This is truly one of the most important components of the voter fund. And finally, I think it's really important for me to remind everyone that the counties do recognize that the voter fund is not a fill all the needs in elections world or one size fits all solution for us. We really want to continue seeing it as a partnership and continued investment in elections. To put that in a little bit of context for you, Blue Earth County's election costs in 2024 were $626,000 after we removed the reimbursement for the presidential nomination primary. Blue Earth County received $13,800 in voter funds in 2023 allocation and another $53,600 in 2024's allocation. That's our 2-year cycle that we use to pay for the 2024 elections. That $67,400 is roughly 11% of the total operational cost for the 2024 election for Blue Earth County. And that does not include any of our equipment purchases, and it also does not include any of the off-year work that we complete in a non-election year that is still related to elections. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. MACO and its member counties are grateful for the voter fund and the legislature's continued commitment to it. We support Senate File 1430 and appreciate your attention and consideration. I'd be happy to go into more detail on example expenditures, how the voter fund is structured, etc., but I'll be respectful of your time and conclude my testimony. I'm always available for questions, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stahlberger. I appreciate your testimony today. Are there any amendments for this bill? I do not see amendments. All right, open for member discussion. Any questions for any of our testifiers? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Carlson. Can you describe, we heard testimony that of the 3 top uses, and I think it was hardware or software, election equipment, and then the election-related staff costs, the 3 top categories of which there were expenses. Can you help, just so I can understand, what is the difference in the categories of hardware or software and election equipment, and specifically hardware versus election equipment?
Senator Carlson, or any testifiers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Lucero, I don't think I could give you a hard and fast answer to that because each county does distribute their funds for different purposes. Perhaps we can get some further guidance from the Secretary of State's office here, from Ms. Freeman.
Ms. Freeman, go ahead and identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Lucero. So I think some examples, and I'll happy to pass the microphone to Mr. Stahlberger as well to fill in any details. But I think some examples of hardware and software would be hardware might include computers. Hardware might include printers for election-specific work, right? Hardware could include I think those would be the best examples of hardware. From a software perspective, I think that could include both software that that is used on those computers, as well as could be used to pay maintenance fees, or if they're entering into a new contract for software with a ballot vendor for that tabulation equipment. That would be another example that I could think of where that would fall under there. And then, election equipment, I think that would be specifically a tabulator, an assistive voting device, or potentially electronic rosters as well. So I think that's, based on the reports that came into our office, that was sort of the delineation that happened there.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the bill, I see that there's a very specific list of direction of where this money would go. Yet, when I look at the document from the Secretary of State's office, there's 11 items that are listed where the money would go. Seems to be a discrepancy. It seems like the Secretary of State has a more generous perspective of where the money goes, rather than state statute if this became law. Could you explain the difference?
Senator Carlson or Ms. Freeman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Limmer. So when I prepared this report, I copied and pasted from 5.03 5.305, subdivision 5. And there's 12 listed there, and for some reason, I'm trying to figure out what was not included, but when I did it, I copied and pasted. So I attempted to pull it from that, so. Oh, so the one thing that I didn't include was transitioning to a .gov domain, number 10 in statute. And in this initial report, which was from fiscal year '24, no jurisdictions used their funds for that. So that's the one discrepancy there.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you. If I look at the bill, the items on 1.8, general fund goes transferred from general fund to voting operations, technology, election resources account. And is that the reference that you just made to the election account?
Ms. Freeman.
Yes, Madam Chair and Senator Limmer, yes, 5.305 in statute establishes the voting operations, technology, and election resources account.
And Madam Chair, the
Senator Limmer.
on the Secretary of State's document, instead of 12, it was listed 11, but the 11th one kind of is a vague reference that simply says any other purpose directly related to elections administration. Tell me what that means. What is any other purpose directly related?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Limmer. Yeah, so we asked a few of the counties who did report, or we asked the I followed up with our staff who took in these reports related to the counties that had listed those any other purchases. Some of the examples were some jurisdictions paid for meals for their election judges. Some of them, instead of, I think in future years, we can provide guidance around where maintenance fees for those software programs and the equipment could be placed, but some of them paid for those maintenance agreements, and they didn't see a good spot in the categories that were provided, and so that was what was there, was their maintenance and firmware for their tabulators. A few replaced batteries. Again, I think this was our first year collecting this report, so we can provide better guidance as to where things might go. But some purchased batteries for their tabulators as well as additional memory devices. And I think that could go in the hardware category. But those are a few examples. Election signs were purchased, privacy boards, and voting booths, that word. Voting booths were purchased. I'm just reading. Election machine maintenance. One city used the dollars for a notice of election to pay the newspaper for publishing their notice of election. Some used the costs to pay their portion of a joint powers agreement with the county. So those are some of the things. Our office, in 5.305, our office is required, the counties and cities are required to provide us detailed listings of what they spent those expenditures on. And so our office reviewed those, and none of them were outside of the scope of elections-related items.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see no other questions. This bill is going to be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee.
And while Senator Carlson makes his way back and takes his gavel back, I believe Senator Marty is up next. Senate File 567. Senator Marty, why don't you go ahead with
Okay.
begin your presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Senate File 567 is a bill that would try and slow down the revolving door between public office and private sector. And this is something I think we've heard about many times over the years. I've been trying to do this a number of times over the years. I very much appreciate the chance to present the bill today. The issue happens that many times people, good people, this is not a criticism of people, but people revolving door between government and private business, it sometimes can be a problem, can cause conflicts of interest. I think this happens in legislative politics. I think it happens in administrative things as well. And a number of states, and I would hope Minnesota would join them, have put in a provision that where if you are serving in public office, you cannot leave public office and go to lobby the same government you were working for. Legislators, we know a lot of people, a lot of friends of ours who served here in the past lobby, and they're not bad people, but I just think it's not the type of thing we do. We try and put some caps on it. We say if you are a former legislator, former senator, you're allowed on the Senate floor. Unless you're a lobbyist, then you can't be on the Senate floor. We've seen that happen many times. We also have it happen between state agencies and so on. So my bill would put a 7-year, and the amount of time isn't that critical. I'd like it to be 5 or 6 or 7 years rather than shorter, but the main thing is we put some time restriction between there. And it would say that you may not act as a lobbyist for 7 years after leaving the legislature or a constitutional office or commissioner, deputy commissioner, assistant commissioner, head of state agencies. In other words, the top officials who do this. And I think it's important to include that. We've heard people talk about capture of agencies and so on, where they are kind of, they see their clients not as the state of Minnesota and the people of Minnesota, but they see their clients as sometimes people they may regulate. We actually do have, at least in a few positions, the opposite too. You cannot revolve into commissioner of, I think, the Pollution Control Agency from a regulated industry. And that's actually been violated in the past. I was unaware of it at the time it was being violated, but to me, I think it's important that we create a separation between the work we do here. We're supposed to be doing the public interest work, and I realize that this is not the most highly compensated positions we have, and I know many people who are working in government can get much higher pay outside in the private sector, and I understand people feel they're doing their sacrifice of working here, and then maybe they should get this. The way I like to think of it, though, is I don't think we're really putting that much of a restriction on people. If I were to leave the legislature and take a position lobbying, there are probably, I don't know what it is, I think some of the committee staff would know better than me, maybe 1,500 lobbyists in Minnesota. There are probably 2 million jobs in Minnesota, and 1,500 out of 2 million isn't take away most of your job opportunities. And again, I'm not saying this to be snarky or anything about it, but I do think I respect people who serve time, and whether it's nonpartisan positions or whether it's public office in partisan nature. We've had some excellent commissioners, excellent agency heads in the state, and excellent legislators. I just think it's better, it's healthier, and it avoids conflict of interest if we create a time lapse in there. So the things that I want to mention, and I know Senator Klein has a good bill on this too, the things I think are most important is I would say it should not just be legislators. I think it's very important we hit other executive branch positions as well. And the second thing is that I think it should be a little bit longer than, I think it should be a 4, 5, 6 year period of time. I'm open to that. I'll take whatever if the committee's open to it, but I'd rather it be a little bit longer. And the third thing, Senator Klein has a good provision in his bill, a penalty, and I actually had 2 amendments drafted on penalties, but wanted to, maybe if Senate Council could put out the two amendments, because I'd like to discuss that with the committee. I certainly am open to it, but while she's having them distributed, I will explain how I feel and why I didn't offer them as amendments, but figure I'd love to have the committee consider them. And the reason for that is if one of us leaves the legislature, if this bill would pass into law, and one of us leaves the legislature and wants to take a lobbying position, thank you, I think most of us say, well, it's against the law, we won't do it. And we wouldn't try. And most principals, the entities, the businesses or nonprofits or other who hire lobbyists would say, I can't hire you. You're a former official, you got this revolving door ban. I think it's pretty self-enforcing that way, and frankly, if I go and get a job with some entity and then I come back and lobby Senator Carlson or some member of the legislature, I think they would kind of look at you, hey, you're not allowed to be here doing that. I think it's sort of self-enforcing, but I realize people point out the House has a legislative rule banning revolving door activity, and it's ignored, it's not enforced. And the trouble with the legislative rule on this is legislative rules affect us as legislators. They do not affect us as former legislators, and therefore it doesn't have any standing. I think this would, but I offer two amendments here, the first of which would be one that's basically what Senator Klein proposed, and I think it's a reasonable way to do it. We give.
Senator Marty, would you have two testifiers? Would you like?
Yeah, go ahead.
Should we hear the testifiers before you?
I'll be brief with
bring
the amendments and have the
yeah.
testifiers, please.
You have, first testifier is Anastasia Belladonna Carrera from Common Cause, Minnesota. Please identify yourself for the record and continue with your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Anastasia Belladonna. I'm the Executive Director for Common Cause Minnesota. For those of you that may not be familiar with who we are a nonpartisan grassroots organization. We do have a C4 arm, but we limit that to our lobbying activities, so I get to do this with you all today. We do not, however, endorse political parties or candidates, politicians. Our base nationally is about 1.5 million. And we've got offices in 29 states. Obviously, I lead the Minnesota office. Here in Minnesota, we've got about 26,000 members in Minnesota. And despite belonging to various party affiliations or maybe not even being affiliated at all, the one thing that they do come together to do is to charge us and support our work, ensuring that our republic's democracy is safeguarded and everyone's vote and voice counts and matters. We're grateful to both Senator Klein and to Senator Marty for creating space, and the chair for creating space for this important issue. We do support Senate File 567. It strategically gets to the problem and moves a solution that our members, our allies, and democracy partners think most effectively centers the needs to protect the integrity of the legislative process, some of the things that Senator Marty already mentioned. Just to give you a little sense of what I mean when I say that our members do that, again, this was not a scientific poll by any means, but we are able to target our base and those that have identified a particular interest in money and politics issues or ethics issues. We did send out a very short, simple survey. We asked essentially what it was that they thought would be a sufficient cooling off period given their own knowledge and so forth on the issue. And what we got back from them, we gave them options of 2, 4, 6, and pretty much any years, right? From the 219 that are in this group, about 31.5% said 4 years was sufficient, 20.5 said 6 years was sufficient. Only about 16.9 said that 2 years were sufficient on that. I forgot to mention, you should also have some additional information in your folders with regards to some of the other points that I wanted to share with committee members today. One of the most concerning threats to the integrity and confidence of our legislative process is the increasing revolving door dynamic that Senator Murphy talked about. I'm sorry, not Murphy. Marty talked about between electeds and lobbying jobs with special interests or private agencies or entities, the same entities that may have moved bills in committee and that the people that are now lobbying sat on themselves. Right now, too many electeds leave the office and immediately go into these types of lobby jobs. This practice undermines the trust we place in our elected officials and weakens the public's confidence in the legislative process. When politicians can simply walk into a well-paid lobbying job without any cooling off period, they carry with them years of insider knowledge and access to key decision makers. It can actually also call into question some of their votes on specific bills during committee at that time. I know that some of you might be familiar with some of the issues we've had in the last, say, 4 or 5 years with some of that dynamic actually bubbling up. Without a cooling off period, these former officials can leverage relationships and knowledge gained in office, giving special interest and outsized voice in our political system. Allowing this to continue has far-reaching effects. It encourages a culture of self-serving politics where public office is seen as a pathway to private gain rather than the responsibility to serve the people. It can lead to policy decisions that benefit powerful lobbyists and donors rather than the needs of regular citizens and Minnesotans. And most importantly, it erodes the very foundation of a democracy that should be built on fairness, transparency, and accountability. 4 years minimally, and thank you actually, Senator Marty, for mentioning your willingness and your openness to this. I think our position is that minimally we should see at least a 4-year cooling off period, particularly maybe if Senator Marty and members would be open to, we have been hearing from both sides of the aisle in this matter and both chambers in my conversations with members, but I think minimally each chamber should have that at least 1-term turnover, right? So that we have the opportunity to have some kind of change or shift in either committee assignment or in maybe even leadership between that, within that cooling off period time. It means that we're able to address that negative sort of testing, right, of the confidence of Minnesotans into the integrity of our legislative process. It just really means that we get to change and help restore faith in our legislative process and ensure that politicians remain accountable to people. And that's really the point here. In conclusion, our Republican democracy is stronger when elected officials are truly working for constituents, not for personal gain or interests. I would even add, not even being tempted by that dynamic. Senate File 567 is the best positioned to protect the integrity and confidence of our legislative process that I mentioned. Members, I do urge you all to vote yes on Senate File 567. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members, Senator Marty and Senator Klein, if he's here or is listening, for opening the door to this important conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Belladonna Carrera. We have another testifier, Lily E.B. E.B. So. Thank you. Please identify yourself for the record and who you're affiliated with, and continue with your testimony.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lily Abisso with Clean Elections Minnesota, and I'm here in support of both SF 567 and HF 1677. Thank you for the opportunity today to speak about these important bills. These bills would impose a moratorium on legislators immediately transitioning into lobby roles and after leaving office. Before I discuss the specifics, I want to emphasize a critical issue of big money in politics and how it undermines our democracy. When powerful special interests have more influence over our political system than everyday citizens, it distorts policy and erodes public trust. SF 567 is more expansive and includes appointees that have control over regulatory processes. Fortunately, we are not alone in recognizing the need for reform. Across the country, 37 states and territories have already passed laws that require waiting periods before former legislators can become lobbyists. These waiting periods typically range from 6 months to 2 years. In fact, Florida has one of the longest waiting periods, a 6-year cooling off period, enacted through a ballot measure. By adopting this bill, we can join these states in setting clear boundaries between public service and private lobbying. First, this legislation is about preventing conflicts of interest. When a former legislator transitions directly into lobbying, they carry insider knowledge with relationships that provide them with a distinct advantage in influencing public policy. A waiting period would help prevent these conflicts, ensuring policies are shaped by the public's needs, not by a few well-connected individuals. Second, it's about restoring public trust. The public must trust that elected officials act in the best interests of their constituents, not in the anticipation of future personal gain. When former legislators immediately become lobbyists, it creates perception that government is merely a stepping stone to lucrative opportunities. A cooling off period helps restore integrity to our public offices. Third, this legislation reduces the undue influence of special interests. Lobbying already plays a powerful role in shaping policy. When former lawmakers take advantage of their connections, it amplifies its power, making it harder for everyday citizens to be heard. By establishing a waiting period, we help level the playing field and ensure government is responsive to all people. Lastly, this legislation promotes accountability. A waiting period ensures former legislators have the time to reflect on their time in office and prevents immediate conflicts of interest. This fosters transparency and allows for careful scrutiny of their actions. In conclusion, these bills are vital steps towards curbing the influence of money in politics. I urge you to support this legislation for a more accountable, transparent government that works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. E.B. So, any other testifiers, Senator Marty?
Mr. Chair, I did not bring any other testifiers. And
Would you like to address your amendments now?
yes, Mr. Chair, I have them. I see I have both of the A3 one is the one that I mentioned would give the Campaign Finance Board the ability, which I think they feel they would like to have, to try and, quote, enforce the laws that are under their jurisdiction. It came, as I said, it's a good provision that Senator Klein has in his bill, civil penalty up to $25,000 or a lesser amount if the lobbyist earns less. The difficulty is it's a good thing because there's some provision the Campaign Finance Board can do something. The difficulty is if somebody's getting $200,000 for doing this, and what is it, a one-time thing, and then you can break the law. We used to have in our laws provision, any laws that were things that were illegal, if we didn't specify penalties, they were misdemeanors. We've since then changed that so they're petty misdemeanors only, so they're not a crime. But the other option would be, because what happens, do I pay the $25,000 fine and get to take the job? I don't think that's what we want to do. The other one is we could put a misdemeanor penalty in there. But again, I'll go back to the fact that because if it's misdemeanor penalty, the Attorney General or county attorney or city attorney could go after them and make sure they don't do it. Again, I'll get back to the thing. I'm not sure if we need a penalty, which is why putting these two amendments out. The A1 is the one that has the misdemeanor and the civil fine. The A3 is just civil fine. But again, I really think, and I don't want to be being naive about this, but I really think that it's a self-enforcing thing. We make certain things against the law. In a case like this, I don't think it would happen, but I'm open to whatever direction the committee would like to go on that.
So, Senator Marty, you're not moving these amendments, you just want them discussed, correct in that?
Mr. Chair, as a member of the committee, I can move them, and I'd be happy to, but I kind of wanted to hear whether the committee thinks penalties are necessary. If we did the misdemeanor one, obviously we'd have to go to Judiciary Committee, which I'm not asking to do, and so I would prefer to do the other one. And again, the question is, I have not heard the Campaign Finance Board's comments on this. I know they do like the ability to enforce the law, but we have other things in law that are just simply illegal and people tend to abide by them. I'd argue, especially in a situation like this, I'm happy to move either of the amendments if members of the committee think they make the bill better.
Thank you. We have people on the list here for discussion. Senator Limerick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Marty, let me give you a hypothetical. If a former legislator who recently quit doing the work, was hired by a lobbying firm to do lobbying in Washington, D.C., and not in Minnesota, would he be guilty of this?
Mr. Chair, I'll ask Senate Counsel to clarify if she thinks I'm incorrect on this, but no, this is you cannot lobby. The prohibition is not acting as a lobbyist who attempts to influence legislative or administrative action. And under our definition of lobbying and legislative and administrative action, that would be Minnesota lobbying. So it would not be, if you went to Washington, you could do it, yes, because I think there are some who might, you have some expertise here, but you wouldn't have the connections in the same way you do here either.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Limmer.
if I can direct you to the A1 amendment. First, I think since it has both a criminal penalty and a civil penalty, it doesn't matter if you have the criminal omitted or not. The civil penalty would qualify you to have a trip to Judiciary Committee anyway. But the big question that I had is, for merely registering as a lobbyist, violating this as a law, to lock someone up for 90 days, I think, is a little severe. And perhaps the up to $1,000 fine might be too little. So I see where you're trying to, walk the line, but I'm just concerned that, I keep looking, and when someone's being accused of a crime, you usually have to have a person that has standing, a victim. Not sure who the victim is here. Is there harm in registering as where is the measurable harm? And is there loss to qualify for the value of what a misdemeanor would encapsulate? Now, some of that sometimes is not, misdemeanor is not equated to a value, it's equated to an action. And so I guess I'm thinking that making this a criminal charge might be in the wrong direction. I think it's stacking on. Most of our colleagues that have retired already, I would not put in the criminal class. There may be one or two that I could think of at the top of my head, but nevertheless, I just don't think this action would qualify for a criminal charge.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Marty.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Limmer. I agree. I didn't move either of the amendments because I'm not sure we need either one of them because of the fact that I frankly think that it's self-enforcing. I think that people, the putting a civil fine in and when you can make many times that much money, does that mean you can violate the civil fine and then keep going because it's a one-time civil fine? No, I don't think either of these are necessary, but I wanted to get the sense of committee on that. I think it's self-enforcing.
Senator Limmer, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I know of a few people that have gone into the lobbying field afterward. I guess I'm trying to find out what problem are we trying to solve? I haven't heard of anyone abusing that business relationship. Oftentimes they have to be maybe in the back office learning the field a little bit before they get out in front of decision makers, but some do and some don't. But I'm trying to figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve. Okay. I know it's kind of prescriptive that you're looking forward, but is this in reaction to something that you've seen in the Minnesota Legislature that is abusive?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, again, when you're talking about something like this, either you got to say, oh, so-and-so is really doing really awful things, or you're saying, oh, it's perfectly okay. And I think there's a little bit difference between there, and that is, I don't think it's a healthy practice. I know of, the one example I used to give many years ago was at the national level because, pointing to people who you work with and everything is not a really great way to approach things. But I remember about 20 years ago when the federal government passed the Medicare Part D prescription drug thing. The chair of the committee that wrote the bill gave something that the industry felt was a $180 billion gift to them, saying the federal government is saying, we're going to buy all these drugs from you, but we won't negotiate prices. You tell us how much to pay. That individual, the week after the bill passed, or a month after the bill passed, announced he was leaving Congress to take a job as the lobbyist, head of the lobbying group at a multi-million-dollar income. That stinks. That's really not good. You're putting something in, the industry really wants you to take a job. I do that don't name the person or anything, I'm just saying that that's the type of thing that happens. We have people, I think we should not have a overly sweet relationship between you and I. Everybody in this room talks with lobbyists all the time. That's part of our system. I don't think they should have any extra advantages than they have already by being here and being present, being able to talk to us all the time. I think the idea that we move between this and that it's an unhealthy revolving door. And if we could slow down that revolving door, I think it would avoid those where somebody leaves the legislature, leaves a commissioner's job or something in order to do lobbying on an issue. And I don't think that's healthy. And I don't really want to get into examples in Minnesota because I don't think that's productive. I think if you ask people, is it healthy for people to leave the legislature and take a lobbying job, or leave a state agency, head of a state agency, go take a lobbying job? I think they'd say, no, we don't need to do that. There is, I said, 2 million jobs available in Minnesota, 1,500 lobbyists. There's still a lot of job opportunities out there for these folks, and I'm not trying to be punitive to anyone. I'm just trying to say, I think this is a step forward. That's the case I've been trying to make, and for many years, and I think it's worth doing.
Okay, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Marty. I just have a handful of questions here. So Senator Limmer touched on it, but I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on what is the definition of legislative and administrative action. I know the legislature, but I want to make sure that, is there a statutory definition of legislative action and administrative action?
Thank you. I'll turn
Senator
to
Marty.
ask Ms. Stengel to do that, but what the definition in Chapter 10A is of legislative administrative action.
Senator Lucero.
It was turned over to staff.
Stengel,
I'm sorry, did you?
I asked Senate Counsel to
Oh,
take a look at it.
Mr. Chair and members, administrative action is defined in 10A.01. I'll just read it as an action by any official board, commission, or agency of the executive branch to adopt, amend, or repeal a rule under Chapter 14. Administrative action does not include the application or administration of an adopted rule, except in the cases of rate setting, power plant and power line siting, and granting of certificates of need under Section 216B.243. So that's the PUC. And I think you had another part of your question.
Legislative
I lost
act.
it. Sorry.
You don't need to read it, but is it defined?
Lucero.
I just want to see if it's defined.
Yes, it is.
It
It's
is,
in
okay.
subdivision 19A in that same statute.
Perfect. Okay, Mr. Chair.
yes. thank
So
you.
the next question I have is, and maybe
Lucero.
it's not for Senator Marty, but for council. I have it in my head that there was, the definition of lobbyist is somebody who visits the Capitol. So I'm thinking in the context of a citizen lobbyist. So they're not hired for anybody, by anybody, it's not a profession, not getting paid. Could you confirm or deny, is there a requirement that a person who visits or is in the Capitol 50 times a year or some threshold, they must register as a lobbyist?
We're going to get the official description from Campaign Finance Board. And I think we have talked about this many times already.
Well, Mr. Chair, just a reminder, I'm new to the committee.
Yeah, good. Oh, that's right. Mr. Sigurdsson, please identify yourself for the record and continue with your answer.
Committee members, my name is Jeff Sigurdsson. I'm with the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. An individual who has not compensated over $3,000 for their lobbying efforts would not have to register as a lobbyist unless they spent over $3,000 of their personal funds on lobbying. So if they spent over $3,000 on preparing handouts or in some other way trying to lobby the legislature, then that individual would also have to register as a lobbyist.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so if I understand correctly, a person who's not being paid but is here for the entire legislative session in any given year, so it'll exceed 50 days, but who then spends $50 $3,000 in gas, parking, handing out, printing literature, et cetera, they may be required. So, Mr. Chair, and just feedback, I'm not looking for any answer, but Senator Marty, just something to consider. There could, because we all know there are a number of people that are here that have a great passion for the legislative process. And they are very different, at least in my mind, very different than the category of a professional being paid lobbyist. I want to ensure that if this moves forward, we're not roping in those type of individuals. So there's certainly a scenario where somebody is a legislator, retires, is defeated, whatever. They have a significant passion for the legislative process. So they're here more than 50 times a year. They're spending more than $3,000 in gas or whatever, but they're not being paid by anybody. So just something to consider as this continues to move forward.
Senator Marty.
Mr. Chair, Senator Lucero, I share your concern, not one, because there are people who are very passionate, and they spend time on their own expense and everything else. And I have no objection if we wanted to say an individual may not receive compensation as a lobbyist who attempts to influence this. I mean, I think that that would help address the fairly rare, but I mean, I think a lot of groups like the League of Women Voters where they're purely volunteer, they're not getting paid, but some of them file as registered as lobbyists because they feel they just want to be clean and make sure they're totally transparent. But the ban here is to stop people from doing it because financially it can be very profitable for some. So I'm open to, certainly open to a, may not change a small amendment if you and Senate Council could easily draft some, but something like may not receive compensation as a lobbyist who attempts to, if that would help.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we don't need to do on the fly here. It's just, I'm not sure even that definite. I mean, again, that's why I don't want to do on the fly is does not receive compensation, may not necessarily get at what I'm trying to do. It may, maybe it will, but just something to consider as this moves forward and as it gets moved on or laid over, I don't even know what the path is, but we just want to be very narrow that you're focused on people that are being hired as a profession and taking advantage of relationships when they were a member.
Mr. Chair, that's very appropriate, and I'll follow up offline with you to talk about language.
Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Marty, Senator Limerick kind of started on the same line as not sure what problem we're trying to solve here. I think it's one of those issues we're always challenged with here. You have a variety of issues that are activist-driven issues, heck, any group organizing around. In our side, God, guns, babies, right to work, you pick them, right? Term limits, this issue. It's a nonstop way to raise an effort, raise money, get behind an issue. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure it has any impact. We've heard, the symptoms of the revolving door. Okay, I'm not sure it's revolving. And I haven't heard from you or anybody in any of the conversations that talk about how many people are there, right? There's a collection of them, former legislators that are serving in some capacity that are still here. But the vast, vast majority are not legislators. I mean, it probably represent 5%. Do you know, Senator Marty, how many current legislators are serving? How many registered lobbyists are there, and how many are former legislators?
Senator Marty.
Mr. Chair, the answer, do I know? I'll say no, I do not know. And Mr. Sigurdson could probably tell us how many registered lobbyists there are. I don't know how many are former legislators.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sigurdson, would you happen to have that knowledge?
Mr. Sigurdson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Klein, the number of lobbyists is approximately 1,475. It does change a little bit every day during session, but approximately that. And we did look at the question of how many former legislators are now currently registered as a lobbyist, and we believe the number is 44.
44?
Correct.
And
Senator Grant.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sigurdson, do we Do we know, do most of those that are currently there, that are 44 of them, do we know, did they register immediately after they left service or have any time frame?
Mr. Sigurdson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Klein, I'm afraid I don't have that information with me, but it'd be simple, is the word I was trying to get to find that out, and I can provide that.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Grant.
Mr. Sigurdson, I appreciate it, and I also love your approximately 1475. I like a broad estimate. So 3% of the population. It's not even 3%. Very, very small number. When we look at, where does this go next? Because again, I'm not sure it solves any problem at all. I think one of the testifiers said, Florida already has 6 years of prohibition. I doubt a single thing changed in the way the legislation works, the way citizens have access. They have access to us all the time. That's our job, to get elected, to bring the will of the citizen voice here. The other part of access in this Capitol, right? A couple buildings around here were locked for 4 years, keeping citizens who might attempt to come down and talk to a legislator, they're locked out. And so I get the lobbyist piece has a negative connotation. It ends up to be a pretty vital resource when you go to gather the collection of expertise. I always tell my motto is there's over 1,000 people down here working for every single thing that you believe in. On the flip side, there's 1,000 people down here working against everything you believe in. And so it ends up to be a vital collection of knowledge for which that information or that skill set is garnered by playing a role in the Capitol, right? How many of your former staff in your caucus are legislators today? Pretty high. The same with ours, the same with the House, the same with both sides of the House. You're right, there's a huge amount of information collected in this process or learned by participating in the process. The fact that somebody knows we're not in Washington, D.C. for each of us who are elected, that's insider knowledge because so little is followed and tracked by the citizen. And so we keep talking that we're trying to protect the citizen from something that, one, they don't know what it is, and currently no one can really describe what it would be, even if we put this in place. Does it materially fix or change anything? And so what I look at then is, do we go down the path and say, all right, the biggest problem is all of our former staff go there. We're going to stop the pipeline for 95% or 97% of the people who fill those roles, vital industry knowledge that represent many industries or a single industry, who are down here to effectuate the things we all believe in, we recreate in, eat, sleep, breathe, whatever. So I don't see any of that being solved. And if our citizens, I tell everybody else the same thing, is when our citizens come down here, if they fail to come down here, right, that's the greatest thing I think for all of us. When the citizens come down, they fill a void. They fill a slot, and it makes their voice more powerful. None of this increases that. It's not going to encourage or entice them to come down here and serve or participate in this role, in this body, while we legislate, and then to bring expert knowledge, right? A legislator or any lobbyist worth their salt brings both sides of every argument. And you also know, much like I cherish, the ones that lie to you, the good news about that, you cross them off your list and you never have to see them again. All of those things occur, and I don't hear a single thing where any of this would be impactful. The other thing I have a challenge with is it also has an amazing omission. When you describe what you're trying to solve at the highest level, there's no mention of those currently serving who work for and or sign bills that work and have a financial relationship or a board seat on a nonprofit, or those that would go into the nonprofit industry or any of those other industries after service. So with that, I'm just struggling. I don't see any path that it solves anything. It'll feel good and it'll service tiny little of the population that's really active around here and maybe cross off one list and then we'll move on to the next one. Then we probably got to get rid of staff. They can't go, we're going to determine what their future employment is based on amazing expertise that can't be learned anywhere else in this process to benefit this process for everyone. So with that, Senator Marty, I can't support it. I just don't see, unless somebody can prove that these things are occurring, unfair influence, erosion of trust, not picking on Common Cause, maybe. But insider knowledge, you're right. There's an amazing amount of information that is obtained here that no one can obtain anywhere else. And even if they teach, where's my favorite, Senator Swedzinski? We came in together, and he's a civics teacher. You learn down here, you've studied it, but there's nothing that prepares you for serving here to understand how it works. They're all vital and necessary parts. I don't know that this would solve anything, so I appreciate your time and allow me to express the way I feel, and I won't have to repeat it because Senator Klein is in the building. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klein. And if you
Real
have some
briefly, yes.
response.
Senator Klein, I'm not going to try and persuade you because obviously you don't see the issue the same way I do. We'll point out that this is not a bill somebody gave me, some interest group gave me or anything over the years. I've been doing this for many years. I've never once had an organization say, please introduce this bill. I think it's an important thing to do. I see the problem, and you say, oh, it wouldn't address this issue, wouldn't address this issue. I understand. I'm not arguing it solves all the world's problems. But I think it's a worthwhile restriction, and I think that it is an important provision to start keeping some distinction between our roles as public officials, as elected, in this case, and appointed public officials who have the public duty responsibility there, and taking a break from that afterwards so people are not being paid to leave the legislature to go straight from here to lobby on issues they've worked on. I think that's an important thing. And again, I'm open to, I prefer a longer term, like 4 to 6, 7 years, but I'm open to anything because I think any break would help. And I certainly think the point about we don't want to hit the people who are volunteering their time, that's a different issue. And, but basically, I think this is worth doing, and I'd urge your support.
Thank you, Senator Marty. Look, we are getting close to the end of our time here, and I'm hoping that we have had a lot of the questions answered already with respect to a revolving door. And from what I am getting advice on here is judiciary does not need to hear either of these bills. Evidently, there's unless it's a higher level of crime, they can decide to not hear it. And then, by the way, we are laying this bill over. So,
Mr. Chair, one final
Senator
point.
Marty.
Yes, obviously, the one amendment, the one that's in Senator Klein's bill, and the A3 amendment would not require it to go to judiciary. I'm not convinced we need it. I'm open to it. Again, my goal is not to say these are bad people doing it. I'm saying it's a process we should change. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you. And thank you. The bill is laid over. Senator Klein. Senator Klein has a very simple bill, changing 7 to 2.
I'm going to quick amend sports wagering onto it.
And be careful, otherwise we'll send it to judiciary.
Mr. Chair and Committee, it's been a long day. You've already heard the arguments in favor of this bill. I'll keep mine very, very brief. My bill is slightly different from Senator Marty's. It only imposes a 2-year restriction on lobbying after legislative service. I thought that was sort of a balance between the rights we're trying to protect of voters for integrity reasons and sort of the right of free enterprise for somebody to pursue employment. I think it's also worth pointing out that most people would agree when we come to these legislative jobs, many of us take financial sacrifice, and it's expected that at some point you would be able to capitalize on that, and I think 2 years is an appropriate interval thereafter. My bill does not have the constitutional office in it that Senator Marty's does, and it does have the $25,000 fine. Members, I would just answer the question that was raised both by Senator Limmer and Senator Corrin about what's the problem we're trying to solve here. And for me personally, I also was not approached by an advocacy group to introduce this bill. It came from my own free will. And when I observe, a number of our legislators leaving office and going into the lobbying world from both parties, To me, it does feel like a violation. I think a voter, when you go and petition a voter for their support, they anticipate that they're going to deliver you into a world of privilege and information and insider knowledge. And their expectation in return is that you'll use that for the public weal and their own benefit. And I think when you translate that into your own mercenary gain, you have abrogated their trust. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve. And this is the bill before you. I don't have any amendments. I don't think I have any testifiers, and I'd love your support.
Members, questions? Senator Coran.
So, Mr. Chair and Senator Klein, I think you got my interest from at least your description was clear, and I think you were elected to a term. And I think if we actually looked at, if you left, right? I think we know a couple that have left in midterm and those things. I could agree 100% with you there. And so to me, you might be able to get 100% support, or certainly significant bipartisan support, is if that was what we're trying to solve for, because they truly were elected. And I think that's an expectation. So I think I appreciate yours is the clearest conversation or description of something that's probably solvable. You were elected by this, and you chose to leave because of a more lucrative opportunity in the industry while you were elected to serve somewhere in that term. And so I would agree, if we looked at that, you'd gain my support. But I also think, too, as I said to Senator Marty, the nonprofit side, all of those, right, going into the heads of those industries that live off here or that you voted for, all those types of things, there's still that same, it's an equal conflict. But I do like that description, because I do think from that perspective, after that, it doesn't provide any material value. But if you're in there and there's some really close relationship where there could be an issue where you describe that conflict, and you're right, people elected you to serve that term. After that term, if they choose to leave or defeated, right, I think then the exercise doesn't really add any material value. But I think from that perspective, if you consider that as this moves around or as time progresses, to me that would solve for exactly what you described. I don't know the cooling period does anything unless we can hear Florida change drastically, which I highly doubt it. And I worry about the scope creep and for Senator Marty as well and Senator Klein. I brought those other issues up about the one-off issues. It's like a lot like it, and we get a lot of pressure. A lot of our citizens talk about it and those things. A lot of it's driven based on the perception of Congress, right? How wealth was attained. We're the opposite. There isn't anybody here where their wealth has increased in any way, shape, or form while serving. To the contrary. And so I think if we I just brought the issue up that those issues come out there and it kind of follows the same path. At the end of the day, when you have a conversation, everybody goes, well, yeah, it's not really an issue, or they don't know that it would be a solution to anything at the end. So, but I appreciate your description, because that really, I think there is a piece there which would get a ton of support.
Any comments?
No response to that. If it's time for closing comments, I would simply want to thank my bipartisan authors, Senator Barr, Senator Drazkowski, and of course, Senator, I can't read without my glasses.
Okay.
Court.
Quick question from Senator Szynski.
I just want to thank both authors of the last two bills, and I wish we could, Senator Coran, you do make some interesting comments. You challenged my mind a little bit today, and I must give you that shout out. But I wish there was an amalgamation of the two bills, because I love your 2 years, and I also love Senator Marty's addition of the other offices that would be tied in with not just the legislators of your bill. And so anyways, but thank you both for bringing this and challenging our minds today.
And Senator Westland has decided to pass. At this time, I want to tell you that the bill is going to be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. And that would be the end of our business for today. So the meeting is adjourned.